I want to extend my thank you to Diversify Communications for, by all accounts, putting together an amazing conference and making this possible. So I want to definitely thank them for that. And Tom, thank you very much for that conversation and that speech. It's fantastic to see what DroneUp is doing to help advance this industry. And as Tom mentioned, it's certainly something that we all need to work together to continue to make happen. So as he said, my name's Grant Guillot. I'm an attorney, and I work at the law firm of Adams and Reese. And one of my primary practice area is drones, of course, but what's interesting is that when I first started practicing in this area a couple years ago, or actually 4 years ago, most of my business was inspections and other use cases for drones. Delivery was kind of, really, drone delivery? That'll never happen. That's a good 10 years off. Well, as you can see, that clearly is not the case anymore. Things have changed very quickly. Most of my clientele now are drone delivery companies, and it is amazing to be a part of something that's going to impact, not only us while we're living, but our children and our grandchildren's lives. Drones are here to stay. It's no longer an if. It's not really even a when anymore because they're here. We are scaling this industry in a way that many people thought was unimaginable just a few short years ago. And so I want to dive right into it and welcome the other panelists. Of course, you already know Tom Walker, the CEO of DroneUp, but it's my pleasure to introduce Robin Grace, who is the Senior Program Manager of the Drone Pilot Program, right? Yep, and she is with the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. And right off the bat, Robin, I want to ask you a question. So Tom mentioned relationships and how it takes several moving parts to make this industry successful and move the industry forward. The relationship between the federal government and the state government in working together to advance this industry is crucial. How do you see things playing out right now in terms of how states are participating and what states like Massachusetts are doing to advance this industry?
Great. Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. It's been great to see everybody in person. So with the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, really what we've tried to do with the drone program is to lead the integration of UAS across the Commonwealth. First, we concentrated on transportation use cases. So really thinking about bridge inspections, rail inspections, how can we enable our rail right-of-way, how do we fly on the rail right-of-way, airports, how do we fly in and out of airports for transportation use cases such as airport obstruction analysis. And what we've really found is that it takes us working with not just state and local leaders, but also working with industry to enable the kind of partnerships that really allow things to get done. So when we start to think about things like drone delivery and advanced air mobility, truly, if we operate without thinking about the municipalities, if we don't engage the planners locally, we're really missing part of the equation. So what we've tried to do at MassDOT is we work with a nonprofit called Mass Autonomy, and we're also participating as part of NASA's ACO3 to think about what the requirements will be for advanced air mobility. And certainly part of that is the drone delivery equation. So that's one way that certainly industry and state and local governments can work together.
Robin, and one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past is humanitarian use cases for drones, and how drones more than ever are really being utilized now to save lives and help with emergency response. I'm from South Louisiana, and it's no secret that we were hit by a monster a couple weeks ago. And unfortunately, it made its way up to the north and impacted much of the country. And we're starting to see it's not just a Gulf Coast problem, that hurricanes are really impacting parts of the country at a rate which is quite astonishing. So what role do you continue seeing drones continuing to play in assisting with those efforts?
Yeah, definitely. There's lots of use cases thinking about emergency response. So as part of MassDOT Aeronautics, we are the air operations lead for the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, which is MEMA. So that's really how we've tried to approach it, is looking at some of the emergency response and humanitarian needs so that we are serving the community. Certainly in the Northeast, we get nor'easters in the winter, and then we also have hurricanes in the summer. And certainly, we have a lot of island communities, so thinking of Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, we have a lot of other areas that are susceptible to flooding and that can get cut off from the mainland. So how we've approached drone delivery, really thinking about how can we get emergency supplies out to some of these island communities. And we're actually working with an industry partner this fall to do a demonstration of some medical delivery out to Martha's Vineyard, just so we are going to be prepared, not just for medical delivery, but also for the emergency response needs in the future.
Great, thanks, Robin. Kofi Asante is the Vice President of Strategy and Business Development at Elroy. Kofi, I want to talk to you about a subject that many of us actually don't think of when we think of drone deliveries, and that's heavy lift, cargo, and certainly if we're seeing small drones, you know, we're seeing a lot of deliveries with these small drones, but certainly there's going to be military and other uses for heavy lift drones and for cargo. So tell me a little bit about how drone deliveries are evolving in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. How's everybody doing? Good? Great. Awesome. It's great to see people in person again. For context, with Elroy Air, we're building an autonomous vertical takeoff and landing system that can deliver about 300 to 500 pounds of cargo over a 300-mile range. One of the core missions for what we're doing is to try and expand express logistics all over the world. When we spend time with the World Bank, they oftentimes mention that over 1 billion people are disconnected from reliable roadways. We want to try and be a part of that solution. So when we think about the markets that we want to prioritize, we typically group it into 3 buckets. 1, defense, 2, commercial, and then 3, humanitarian. On the defense side, we've been fortunate because we don't have to think about a lot of the missions from scratch. Organizations like the Air Force, the Navy, Army, Marine Corps have been incredibly helpful for us. And even next year, we're going to be kickstarting some flight tests with the Air Force through the Agility Prime program. On the commercial side, we typically group it into a couple sectors. There's express parcel and e-commerce, some of the great work that Tom and DroneUp are doing. There's healthcare and medical supplies, and you can think about this as organ delivery, vaccines, potentially even blood. There's remote operations as well, whether those be equipment parts or even just being able to service some of those rural areas that are hard to reach. And then on the humanitarian side, we're mindful, and this ends up being one of our core missions, to try and increase the tempo of logistics and essential goods to vulnerable communities. And so that's why from day one, we've thought about investing in autonomy as a core piece of our aircraft, making sure that our system is decoupled from infrastructure, so VTOL, no need for airports, no need for roadways, and then also having a hybrid electric system. This hybrid electric system makes it so that we don't necessarily need to have expensive charging stations all over the network. And so these are some of the sectors that we care pretty deeply about. Our phasing of how we're thinking about actually rolling out our operations will likely start with defense, work our way into some of the international remote operations, and then work our way back to the U.S. as well to start to be able to fly over traffic one day in the distant future.
Now, Kofi, when we're talking about heavy lift drones and cargo deliveries, a question that also comes up is return on investment and cost effectiveness. Let's talk a little bit about that. How feasible is it right now to implement drone deliveries using heavy lift?
Yeah, great question. I'd like to group it into a couple categories for us. So for ROI, we think about this for the customer, and then we think about it for ourselves. For the customer, the investments that we've made in autonomy and making sure that we're building a very reliable aircraft are what we imagine are going to be some of the biggest drivers for giving them that type of ROI. To go a layer deeper here, the autonomy, especially with the way that our system is set up, means that you actually decouple the cargo loading process from the aircraft. Our cargo pod is separate, so that you can load that and then make sure that you have a high level of utilization. Whenever the cargo pod is ready, the aircraft can come over, attach, and then go to its next location. We think about this high tempo where you're able to do 10, 15, 20 trips a day as a way that you can actually get a lot of your ROI back. On the other side, making sure that we're building a very reliable aircraft is something that's top of mind for us. As Tom mentioned, safety is incredibly important, but aircraft naturally have certain standards that we have to be able to abide to. And so something that we've been fortunate about, especially with our most recent raise, our $40 million Series A, we were able to get Lockheed Martin as a part of that. Lockheed Martin has a history of being able to build some of the most innovative aircraft and has actually been intimately involved in our process. We're also working with NASA to make sure that we're making sure that they are very reliable and that we can continue to have the production that we're going to need. The last piece that I would mention on the topic of production is really scale. So as we build more of these systems, we expect to be able to drive down a lot of the costs, and then that's how we'll be able to give that ROI back.
Great, thanks, Kofi. So I want to move into a subject that I've spoken on many times that's really changed this industry, and that's public perception. When I first started working in this industry about 4 years ago, it's almost like you couldn't turn on the news or the TV without the main villain of the movie being a drone or the main villain using a drone. And it was just awful for our industry because, as we all know, there are so many great use cases for drones and they help humanity in so many different ways. But then something happened, and of course, that being in early 2020, people really began to appreciate and demand social distancing and contactless deliveries. And at a time when the economy took a hit, because of quarantine measures and things like that. And when the pandemic was really at its worst in 2020, which is that spring, I think it was, we saw an amazing thing happen in this industry. And on one hand, you had certain businesses where certain people did not want to leave their houses to go to work because they were quarantined. So even if they were essential workers, you had a reduction in workforce. We saw certain end-user industries really come to appreciate drones in that instance because they can perform tasks, as you know, that humans can. So instead of sending someone up to inspect a tower, you can send a drone up there. We've known this for years, of course, but this kind of became mainstream, I feel like, 4 years ago. And now we're seeing many states kind of demand the use of drones in emergency response for when power lines go down, telecom wires go down. But what really was amazing about our industry is how drone delivery just blossomed last year. And it's no secret that DroneUp has been crucial to making that happen. And I have to tell just a personal story real quick because I think it speaks to this issue. I work with Tom and I work with DroneUp, and I will tell you that I personally went to Cheektowaga, New York in October, I think it was, of last year when they were performing COVID-19 test kit deliveries. And I had never seen I've never seen how a person responds to a drone delivery, so I wanted to see it for myself. I was advocating for it left and right, but I never got to see it in practice. So we were, of course, within the line of sight and near a Walmart location, but this elderly lady asked, what are we doing, what's going on, why they're flying machines all around. And so we explained it to her, and I was expecting her to be like, not in my backyard. I don't want that thing spying on me. But she was like, wait a minute, are you telling me that I don't have to go to a pharmacy, I don't have to go to a hospital, and I can get a COVID-19 test? I said, that's what I'm telling you, absolutely. She said, sign me up. So I think she may have been one of the first ones we did. But it was amazing to see that. Well, then I went and joined the team where they were in the parking lot. That was, I think, their launching point back then in October. And cops started driving by. The cops could not get enough of it. They thought it was the coolest thing. I thought for sure they were there to try to shut us down or something, but they actually were amazed by it and so impressed. So what I began to see is that the correlation between what we see, we already knew that, sometimes what we see in media is not always what's reality. Certainly cinema is not always reality, but I came to realize the public either likes drones a lot more than we thought, or that they've come to really appreciate them because of the horrible position all of us have been put in as a result of this pandemic. So, Tom, I want to ask you, how do you see the pandemic continuing to play out in terms of impacting drone deliveries? Do you think we're going to continue to see that positive public response for contactless deliveries?
It's a good question. I will tell you that we had the opportunity to watch the public perception change in real time over this 9 weeks. And I used to say that you had a better chance of getting hit by a stray golf ball in your bathroom than you did the media having a positive story about drones. And if you remember, that was pretty true. The evening news up until 19 and heading into 20 was generally very combative with drones. And every time a plane would hit a bird, it was a drone until you could pull the feathers out and prove it otherwise. And so when we started our first operation in Vegas, I will tell you that probably 75% of the people, and oh, by the way, we're going to have you do this delivery, and thank you, Walmart. We're going to put you right out in the very front of the store to do the operation so that everybody coming in and leaving the store can walk by you. And they had opinions about what we were doing, and we got to hear them all. And I will tell you that for the first few weeks, it was very negative. You're not flying over my house. If you fly over my house, we're going to call the cops, and they did. But over time, those same people started coming back. And by the end of even our very first 6-week operation, we had probably 9 out of 10 were telling us how excited they were. We were getting calls from mayors and city leaders in adjacent cities asking when we were going to be doing delivery there. And we had people from leadership in other states calling. And you could actually see that same shift in perception happen online on social media. I mean, there was always those, right, who have an opinion that is disparate from your own. But in this case, we've seen that shift. So when you ask, how is the pandemic going to continue that? I don't think that that's the pandemic's responsibility. Now I think it's our industry's responsibility. I don't want drone delivery to be inextricably tied to the pandemic, because that can change a lot of momentum in the event that we finally overcome the pandemic. And we want to basically take this opportunity now to start shifting perception on how safe, how effective, and how efficient drones can be. And I'd like to, in my world, discontinue the conversation from it being tied to the pandemic.
And it's, I mean, how many of us could, I know we used to, when you would order from it used to be a catalog, but then of course you had online ordering, and you found you could get something in 2 weeks. Like, oh my God, that's amazing, I can get something in 2 weeks. Then all of a sudden it became, you can get something in 2 days. And the point I'm making is that when people realize how convenient drone deliveries are, it's going to no longer be an issue. It's going to be something people expect and demand. So I do think it will outlive the pandemic, certainly. And I mean, as you can probably tell, I'm an extrovert. I like being around people, but you know what I like even more? I like it when people leave stuff at my door and walk away, and I can just open the door and pick up the pizza. I mean, it's horrible, but it's, and so that's the thing. The thing is, that's going to continue. And I think that drones are ideally positioned to really fulfill that need that society increasingly has. So, Robin, one of the things I wanted to ask about MassDOT is, I mentioned earlier how important it is to see states working in conjunction with the federal government. Have you noticed that DOTs across the country are paying more attention to drone deliveries directly as a result of the pandemic, or do you think it was just always coming that way and that this just sped it up?
I definitely agree that it was always going to happen, but I do think that COVID definitely sped things up. If you look at the past year and how many people have started to do online ordering, not just of of large orders, they're doing small orders now. I need toilet paper. We all remember that. Well, I need it now. How can I get that one item quickly? And at the beginning of the pandemic, certainly it wasn't that big of a deal to have Uber Eats and Instacart and Amazon with Whole Foods and Walmart doing these deliveries because there wasn't a lot of people on the road. Well, now we're post-pandemic and people are starting to get back on the road. And, you talk to your average Bostonian and they're like, wow, the traffic's worse than it has ever been. So certainly there is a need to think about being more green and thinking about getting cars off the roads so we don't end up overwhelming our roadways. And certainly, as we think about the public perception and what we can do, I think we're really in an area now where we're primed. We just had COVID. People are a little bit more willing now to see what drones can do for the community. And we're also in a position now where the traffic, everybody's thinking green now. We're really in a position now to say, hey, this is an area in which drones can really help. We're keeping cars off the roads, we're being green. So I think certainly being transparent and really working with the communities is an area in which the states can help. We have 351 municipalities in Massachusetts. We're a great conduit in working with those communities to enable this, this venture, certainly.
So I also want to ask about advanced air mobility because that's a key component to this puzzle as well. And something that we've seen in this industry is where should the focus be? Are we focusing on advanced air mobility too soon? Is it too late? Where should our focus be right now? So now that we're seeing drone deliveries really grow in both popularity and occurrence, do you see attention turning more to advanced air mobility as we learn to put these devices on the same grid as other forms of transportation?
Yeah, certainly, and I don't think we can afford to not think about it right now. Certainly, the rest of the world is thinking about it, and we don't want to fall behind, so there is that aspect of it. But certainly, if we want to start to get these systems up off the ground, no pun intended, we really need to be talking to community leaders now. We really need to start getting into the planning. We really need to start thinking about the infrastructure. We need to think about the community acceptance. And I think when we think about advanced air mobility, it's certainly the movement of goods and cargo as well. I think that if we can shape the narrative that, drones are doing good things, drones are helping with humanitarian, they're bringing you Walmart packages at your convenience. When you see us at the train stations, we're out helping your trains run on time. That's the messaging that we've been trying to do with MassDOT. It'll go a long way to shaping the public opinion.
So, Kofi, one of the things I wanted to ask you, when we talk about heavy lift and cargo deliveries, how far off do you think we are at seeing that at scale? I know earlier we discussed the ROI on it and what's the cost effectiveness, but when you're looking at the regulatory environment and where things are right now with small drones, what do you anticipate in terms of a timeline to the extent, we've all learned not to hold anyone to timelines when it comes to drones because it's constantly changing. Again, no one could have known we'd be sitting on the stage having a drone delivery keynote 2 years ago, but that's just where the industry's taken us. So in terms of heavy lift and cargo, where do you see this going?
Yeah, good question. So for systems like ours, ones that are going to be primarily focused on middle mile industrial applications, we foresee that the time is now. From a technological standpoint, our aircraft is more similar to a flying car or a flying taxi than necessarily a smaller drone. What we are excited about is as soon as even next year, so middle of next year, we're going to kickstart our flight campaign with the Air Force. And so as a result of that, we're looking at the defense market as one of the primary, kickstarters for having these applications actually integrated into the network. The defense market naturally doesn't have the same certification process as the US or as other civil aviation authorities around the world. As a result of that and the high need to make sure that we don't put pilots at risk in challenging environments or in dangerous environments, we believe that we can kickstart that very soon. The next portion of growth that we foresee is the international market. And it's not too unfamiliar if you're following the smaller drones where they go to environments like Rwanda, Ghana, Australia, and actually be able to deliver goods that are incredibly important. We think about that as blood, humanitarian type of work, vaccines. And so international feels like it's right around the corner, and it's possible that we could actually do those in parallel, defense and international remote operations. Because of the way that our system is set up, you may not actually see our aircraft at any point in time, even if it's going to be adding value to you, because we would actually be going potentially from an airport to a warehouse or a warehouse to a warehouse. And so defense, international, and then in the long term, our goal is to make sure that we can actually have these operations here in the U.S. as well. As expected, if we think about this from a risk-based approach, we're going to likely start in remote environments first and then work our way to being able to have that vision where you're actually flying over traffic.
I certainly agree. I think we're absolutely approaching that. We've seen some big advancements in operations over people, some big regulatory advancements. Obviously, we all know with the new rules that came out. And actually, I want to kind of turn and talk about the regulatory environment. And but before I do that, I also want to mention, Kofi, you mentioned something very important, and that's the humanitarian aspects, the delivery of vaccines and the delivery of other items. Tom, talk to me a little bit about DroneUp's involvement and what you're doing in that aspect, because I know DroneUp is also involved in delivering humanitarian goods like that as well.
Right. Right. Unfortunately, as the pandemic had the same effect on Rachel, it had the same effect on Steve from SUNY, who was going to be here. We have been for several months also doing a similar pilot project up in Syracuse, where we were able to utilize our Flight Over People and Moving Vehicle waiver for COVID test kit and other medical related devices. It was an exciting time to actually be flying from the rooftop of one hospital to the rooftop of another hospital and land right on the helipad in the middle of rush hour traffic. If you want to know what tense feels like, do that a handful of times. But as a result of that, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, we are operating in a very controlled environment, but we are having the opportunity to collaborate with a phenomenal institution with Upstate Medical in taking not just what we're learning on the retail side and bringing it over to help kind of integrate that into the campus delivery model, but we're learning thing in the campus delivery model with new areas of the regulatory environment of carrying various different types of medical components and tissues and blood samples and other samples that suddenly we're starting to ask questions of under Part 107 exactly what can we carry. And as a result, we've actually determined that there was a lot more that we could carry than we thought. So we're fortunate, and that's what we look for in partnerships is a good retail partner, a good medical partner, a good campus delivery partner, a good with NATO. We have the opportunity to participate there, so that gives us another little view of the world. Yeah, we're really excited about the work that we're doing up in SUNY, and I understand there's going to be a story published about it later today or tomorrow that had nothing to do with this event. So check it out.
Thanks, Tom. And, I mentioned the regulatory environment, and something Tom mentioned earlier is how it's our responsibility, it's the industry's responsibility to move the industry forward, and I think that's absolutely correct. What we've seen is the FAA in terms of drones, what I've especially noticed the past couple of years is they support a company doing what it can under Part 107, under the current regulations. And there's so much more you can do that you don't realize or that you don't think about. Yes, BVLOS is necessary, and yes, that has to happen, and it will happen. But there are a lot of things you can be doing under Part 107. So, I guess I'll turn this question, Tom, in working with the FAA, what advice would you have for companies that want to innovate and do things that they might think are a little beyond the scope of what's possible because they're timid about the regulatory environment based on your experience with the FAA?
I finally figured out how to answer this question. Think back to when you were 16 and you wanted to go ask mom or dad about something you wanted to do. What I've learned with the FAA is don't say can I, don't say may we, but take what I learned both in the military and as having parents, and we use what we call the buy your leave sir approach. Anybody in the military here know what the buy your leave sir, what I mean by that? Basically, what we do is we maintain an extraordinary amount of transparency, and I encourage this. People are intimidated sometimes. They don't want to pick up the phone and call the FAA and say, here's what I'm going to do. And we do that every single time. If we open a new location, if we're opening a new delivery, if we're starting a new process that we haven't previously used, if we're working with a new partner that we haven't worked, we don't get any permission from the FAA for that. But what it allows us to do, and we've learned that they're actually not only willing, but appreciative of the opportunity to have this dialogue, because you have to remember, and I don't mean this negatively to the FAA, they're not really out in the field operating every day like we are. They're not the ones that are out doing the operations and seeing how certain restrictions are limiting our ability to grow the revenue model in that particular sector, even though we're falling clearly within a safe set of parameters. So this dialogue, we've learned, is equally valuable for them. It becomes valuable for us, and then it also gives us the opportunity when things don't go perfectly to pick up the phone and call them and tell them. And there's always been, I think, a hesitancy of our industry to do that. Well, it's not reportable, so why would I tell them? I'll tell you why. Because the next time somebody decides to do the same operation you did, the FAA can then offer them guidance that may protect them from an incident afterwards by having that. That's what I was talking about earlier, about having a more open dialogue, both with federal, state, and local authorities.
Thanks, Tom. And we're going to do something a little different. We decided to open it up for questions. Drone deliveries is such a fascinating subject. It's a lot of fun, and we're seeing some great use cases coming every day. So there are microphones at both the to my right and left. If anyone has a question, please feel free to come ask. Otherwise, believe me, I can find plenty of things to say. So
you mentioned that, sorry if you can hear me. You mentioned that you were surprised by the variety of things that you could carry under Part 107. Can you give some specific examples of like what stood out?
Yeah, essentially, unless it was hazardous materials or narcotics that required both an ID verification on the other end, there really isn't a whole lot left that we can't carry. We can carry over-the-counter medications. We can carry prescription medications. And in often cases, what we've learned is the FAA actually defers those type of decisions to the state pharmaceutical boards, which actually is both a blessing and a curse, right? Because the blessing is, yes, you can carry anything you want as long as each individual state tells you that they're okay with that. So that's the process we're working through. But so far, certainly you've seen alcohol delivery. There is a group right now that is putting together a program to start delivering dispensary materials via drones. And my understanding is that is already, that's already passed the sniff test with the FAA and is now being deferred down to the states for control of that as well. So it's surprising the things that are not specifically restricted by the FAA that you may have thought so.
I can tell you there's a big push in New Orleans for alcohol drone deliveries. They're very excited about it.
That's in the part of where he lives, and he's the big push.
I wasn't going to say that. Next question.
Hi, my name is Pratik. I'm an entrepreneur out of San Francisco. My question is around precision and situations where GPS is not good enough. So in cities where there's a lot of interference, or when lighting conditions are not good, or weather is too hot, how is this industry planning for solving for precision and GPS-denied situations?
Do any of you want to take that?
I can take a stab at it. I think, when you look at this industry, always going for the lowest hanging fruit is probably a good place to start. So I think a lot of industry people have thought about, maybe doing rural delivery, thinking about doing the suburb type of delivery. We definitely have GPS issues in our city. I don't know if anybody's driven through Boston and tried to follow a GPS. It's ridiculous. But certainly also thinking about other technologies that could be out there that, so being open-minded about other networks that we could potentially utilize could certainly be something that we look at as we start to think about the inner city delivery. And I think even with inner city delivery, we're looking at a lot of other issues about where you're going to land these and where people are going to pick it up and things like that.
Yeah, I'll add one more. We have found, because remember, we're both on the drone services side and delivery side, we found that the area where GPS-denied environments has been more problematic for us is when we're doing inside inspections. Obviously, that creates a little bit of a challenge. But for us right now, because we have triple redundant connectivity, so we have connectivity to the drone, so there's certain things that allows us to know in terms of general position. But the other thing is because we're operating self-imposed in a SAG index, which is the Signal Air and Ground Safety Index, right? Above a certain level, in order for us to be at that safe level, we're generally not in congested downtown spaces. We're typically in spaces where that's a consideration, is the redundancy of connectivity and access to GPS information. So for us right now, we're trying to operate in areas where it's not a current threat until we have fully resolved how we're going to deal with it.
Well, I'm sure you want to be. I think it'd be interesting to talk more. We're building technology that is not GPS dependent and builds on UWB radio signals. So basically, centimeter precision in any environment. We'd be interested in collaborate.
Nathan Ike here with Dual RC. I have a regulatory question. In 14 CFR 107.205, Section C lists line-of-sight operations as one of those regulations subject to waiver, but it also specifically disallows, and I quote, the carriage of property of another by aircraft for compensation or hire. How does DroneUp plan to move forward with deliveries without the availability to get a BVLOS waiver for delivery?
We're going to get a waiver for BVLOS. I mean, I don't know how yet. No, I'm just kidding. There's a couple of different options here. One is, I understand that the reason that was written, right? There's two specific times that you cannot waive BVLOS operations under 107, that being one from the operation of a moving vehicle. Both of those were set up at the time because they did not want, 107 didn't cover air carrier operations, so they wanted to protect it. And if you go back and look at the notes in the rulemaking committee, why were those two specific waivers, two specific exceptions of the waiver in there? It was because at the time, they did not think it was valuable enough that there was a foreseeable, efficient and affordable and achievable way to do 107 operations based on the standards that they were writing it for, which was essentially line of sight. We're now beginning to see that the method and the methodologies and the performance models and the sophistication of 107 operators today, not just us, I see them all over the world, far exceeds what was originally envisioned when that 107 restriction was written. We think there's multiple ways to approach this. One is readdress those exceptions in 10 CFR 107, right? That's the first one, and we are working on that. We're having discussions with members of Congress and others and saying, is that really today? We're working with the FAA on that. There's another little issue in that, and that's you have to carefully read those words. Carriage of property of another for compensation or hire. Now the question is it all or part of that? And if you start asking that question and you go back to English class and you start breaking down the components of that sentence, then I think you will find that there may be other paths that will allow you to achieve that as long as you meet the safe standards of what you're carrying. I mean, you go back to part one, if you go back and look at air carrier operations definition, and Grant gets mad when I do this, it is the carriage of property and other for compensation or hire across state or international lines or the carriage of U.S. mail. Okay, well, let's don't do any of those things. Let's don't go across state lines. Let's don't go across international lines. And let's don't carry U.S. mail. I think there's a path there. I think we, the industry, and the FAA have to figure out how to get there.
That answers my question. Thank you.
I think Tom was a lawyer in his past life. He often has the analysis figured out before he even asked me the question. He's testing me. But anyway, I think it's true that what's important to keep in mind about that prohibition on that waiver, it was written in a very different time. That time is certainly not now when the public is demanding drone deliveries. So it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out, but I have hope that with the positive shift in public perception, you will see a positive shift in the regulatory environment, and I think we will see that. So I want to thank all of you. I want to thank the panelists for imparting their great knowledge on all this. Robin, Kofi, and Tom, thank the three of you so much. And again, thank you to Diversified Communications for putting on the first real great drone conference we've seen in a while. So great to see all of you. Thank you.